Good. I have the pleasure of introducing Paul Barron, who is a business mentor and startup advisor. Welcome, Paul.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the invitation to be a part of it.
Of course. Now, he has spanned everything from tourism to government to 3D printing and even the President of Melbourne Angels. So I guess it's without a doubt your career is nothing but diverse, and it almost brings the portfolio career to the next level. I'm going to start with the first question. I'm really curious around the diversity of your career and maybe a couple of the things that you're really proud of.
Yeah, I suppose diversity characterizes my career. I started out working in a small consulting company, and then I worked in large corporates like BP and Telstra, and of course later Tourism Victoria. But I suppose in the mid-90s, I had my own startup. It was a startup failure, and I often say you learn more from failures than successes. So it's an odd
100%.
thing to think of as a career highlight, being a startup failure in the mid-90s before it was kind of fashionable. But that was a bit of a highlight for me and a learning experience. Since then, so really probably the major challenge in my career has been, I'd describe over the last 6 years, when as a guy in his 50s, you go through a bunch of changes and you want to reinvent yourself. You spend a lot of time in corporate. And so for me, that transition from a kind of a corporate life to a portfolio career has been a major challenge, and it continues to be, but also a success to build the kind of life that I hope to build.
Mm. Wow, you've touched on a couple of themes there. One is around age, and I'd almost go, it's sort of the mid career, well, later career crisis, and the thinking that you might want to do something a little bit more meaning for yourself, and obviously set yourself up. Maybe can you just talk through your thought process
Sure.
when you're late, going into your 50s, thinking, okay, I'm gonna start afresh. What's going through your mind?
I guess I started on this particular journey. I'm just about to be 59, actually. It's terrible. I don't feel that old. And,
Good.
like many people in the beginning of their 50s, I was part of an organization that went through a career restructure. The view of the powers that be at that time was that it was time to turn over management. I was a part of that. I got to do a few different things as part of my transition out. It did allow me to pursue a dream, because in corporate world, you get a bit disconnected from where true innovation and true change is happening in the economy, and that's often in the startup space. And it was always my dream to be able to leave corporate and return and take a desk in Spy 9, which is one of the very early startup spaces here in Melbourne. And, I had the opportunity through taking a package to do that. At the same time, I recognized that I wasn't ready it was the wrong time of my life to have my own startup where I was. I wanted to spend time with my children. I wanted to have a life. And at that time, somebody in my family passed away. So that allowed me, I guess, some financial opportunity to get into a different part of the startup community, and that's angel investment. So I think it's been a challenge, and the challenge for many individuals is working out who we are in our later stage. How many times do you go to an event or a startup and people say, "What do you do?" And that's really your identity. And so one of the challenges in life is reinventing that identity, and that's been a challenge for me.
So where have you landed when you go out networking? What do you say?
I hate the question. Well, so what do you do?
Yes.
Because the other thing is, I've been an angel investor now for 6 years, and the pathway of an angel investor is after 6 years, you've kind of usually put your money in and you're sort of going a bit quiet. That's part of the reason I've stepped back from being a president of Melbourne Angels, but it often depends on the context. So for some people, I'm a commercial director in an advanced manufacturing company. For other people, I'm a immediate past president of Melbourne Angels. For some other people, I am a business coach that's on the Victorian government business bus. For even a further set of people, I'm on various boards. I'm a board secretary. So it often depends on the context. And, I imagine once people have asked me, so what do you do, Krishna? They often, there's a look of regret. At 5 minutes later, I'm still going. So I really need a better elevator pitch about what I do sometimes.
That's awesome. And besides the storytelling piece, and then the building resilience after you left your last full time corporate role, tell me the core skills that you've developed to be able to take that next step.
Oh, that's a really good question. The first thing I'd say is that at the end of corporate life, you've often got a lot of skills, but you've got to be prepared. And in my case, and certainly friends' cases, there's a transition period. And guess what? It's usually about 2.5 years. And the transition period is not always about learning new things. It's about product market fit, where you are the product and the market is out there. And for me, it was understanding where I could fit in and where I could take the skills that I had and bring that to the market. Now, for me, like for many people, you have a core expertise. And certainly when I finished, it was in tourism and digital. But I wanted to learn a whole bunch of new stuff. And so the learning path I took was angel investment. And certainly in organizations like Melbourne Angels, you learn a lot about the investment process and you become a hands-on deal lead, and there's some great training courses. And really, that allowed me to reorientate my thinking and my expertise and my training in a completely new area, because I really kind of wanted to escape from tourism and digital after so many years working in that space. So some sort of anchor like that. And for me, it was Melbourne Angels. I had a second anchor as well, and that was I became a volunteer firefighter. And that allowed me to explore a whole range of different skills and experiences and really to develop myself personally in a different way. And it's been really important to me as well. So you could see that professional side, but also the volunteer side, and that's critical. I think
Mm.
one other thing that's very, very important is your network, because often people will find when they've finished their jobs, like for me, I suppose it was about 52 or so, you start applying for jobs, and I'm sorry to say that people can't, the ageism is a thing, I want to say. It's people kind of look at you in a different way at a certain age. And, just applying for jobs that normally you would have walked into 5 or 10 years ago just doesn't seem to work. I have got a lot of work over the last 6 years, and almost none of it has come through any kind of formal processes. All of it has come through my network, my reputation, and building that. And even by being part of things like Melbourne Angels for the first time, helping people raise capital, helping people, with things like that, which I never thought I would have been doing professionally. And for me as well, working in startups, becoming an investor in an advanced manufacturing field, suddenly then joining the board and then being invited to be part of a management team on a sort of part-time basis, suddenly it allowed me to reinvent my skills and to learn new things. So also the startup space is a great space for people like me. Just be aware it's not always a great way to earn money. I own a lot of equity in a couple of my
Yeah.
companies, really off the back of my sweat. And my partner looks at me and says, it'd be really great to get actual cash, Paul, sometime. so,
You will. You
so
will
that's
eventually.
yeah, one day, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's
I
awesome.
think, yeah, I think also I'd like to mention, the context of your whole life. So for me, I've spent a wonderful time over the last 6 years with my family, my kids particularly. My wife was more part-time. She really dialed up her career to full-time. We've got a couple of kids. Son's just doing VCE now. So it gave me a real opportunity to spend time with him and my daughter as well, and spend time with their lives. And that was fantastic. I'll never regret that. And the flexibility in my career has allowed me to do that. But I do a lot more, making sure the house is running smoothly and all of that sort of stuff. So that's good.
Mm. Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that. I think besides the open-mindedness to, that flexible career, you one, you have to have a little bit of steeliness about you,
Mm.
and your then capacity to learn. You've still got to want to have that sort of capacity to learn, which not, I suppose when as you get older, sometimes you get a little bit stuck in your ways, but you've obviously leaned into the other way, which I find amazing, right? And I wonder if you were going to give anyone advice moving from an executive career to a portfolio career, or actually dabbling in startups, what would your advice be?
Okay, the first thing is it's often very natural for more senior people to say, well, look, my next role is on boards, and they go and they do the board course. It's tremendously difficult to get on boards. It's difficult to build a career in that space. And the other thing that to note about boards and those sort of senior post corporate roles is somebody said to me once, there's nothing more boring than someone who wants to be on a board for being on a board's sake. If you're going to head down that route, only be on boards for things you're passionate about. So I guess we all hope sometimes out of senior roles that these opportunities will arise, but it's a really tough road, even if you've got sort of highly sort of special skills. So don't sort of get too excited about that space. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I guess, a period of reflection on what you want to achieve post career. For me, often the early part of your career is about, I suppose, your own objectives, achieving for yourself in some ways and kicking those goals. The later part of your career is more about enabling other people to do that. I suppose to have a football analogy, moving from being a player to the coach, perhaps, or being more of an enabler. So these days, I take joy in the success of others and their achievements, and I think many people are like that. They sort of reflect and say, "Well, look, like I've had a great run. I need to take a breath. How can I contribute? I can share my experience." However, I've got to say a big thing. A lot of people in that role, and the members of Melbourne Angels are just the same, is when you've been on the journey, you feel like, you just got to spout out your wisdom and everybody will love that. Well, that ain't the way it is. People get jacked off with,
Mm,
everybody telling you the way it is. I think there needs to be a humility and a recognition that it's more important to listen and just reflect and be there than just say, what you need to do is this, 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 this. I mean, you can always do that if people ask you, but I think that the biggest challenge people often get with, people who are in that later stage of their career is that they come with this big ego and feel the need to tell everybody how great they were, and all the great things they did, and that's not helpful and not pleasant for the listener as well. So that's a cautionary tale. I'm not sure I quite answered your question. Uh, I think the third thing I would say is about challenging assumptions. I really didn't want to do too much consulting, and I never saw myself as a coach when I finished my corporate career. But invariably, you end up doing it, and it's hard to avoid that. However, suddenly you find out new parts of yourself, is my advice. I never thought I'd be advising small business, but and I run cash flow management courses, and people might be surprised to hear that, but actually, like, I'm really good at it. I mean, I said it sounds like I'm arrogant, but the feedback from the courses are really good, and it's actually It's a kind of a boring course, cash flow, but it's critical to business and small business. And people are very grateful. And trying to make a course like that engaging and interesting, I have to deliver it online half the time. This is for Business Victoria. And it's rewarding when you know that you're making a difference on an essential area, which is otherwise not particularly exciting. So
Yeah,
you end up
great.
doing things you won't expect to do.
Yeah, that's great. And I know you mentioned your network
Mm.
after your corporate career as well. How do you think that's changed over time? And if someone has a corporate career, and a lot of people listening are also going to be mid-career as well, so maybe a few years down the track, but a few years down the track is a great way to really start nurturing and maintaining a lot of those networks as well. How has your network changed over time, and how have you lent on your network?
Yeah, it's a good question. Immediately after I finished in a corporate environment, there was certainly a very live network of individuals from that environment. But over time, that drifts away. Certainly with
Mm.
Melbourne Angels, massive sort of network as part of that group has really helped me. So being part of the startup environment down here in Victoria, at least, and even nationally, it's a real family. You know, you're often in a situation where you can help people out, and then it's sometimes difficult when you're older, like me, to say, "Oh, geez, I really wouldn't mind a bit more work, please." Like I'm always, by the way,
Mm.
about a day and a half short a week of perfection in terms of my work
Mhm.
pipeline, and it requires a bit of humility to say, "Look, I'm really looking around for more work." So I guess for me, you try to adopt an app of yin and yang karma. I'm always trying to help people. I do a lot of work for free and then hope it comes back. It's a real tension. Somebody like me, I'm always giving advice, particularly as a Melbourne Angel to early stage. And I feel really conflicted about asking for money when I'm just saying, well, when you're raising capital, you got to, go through the list. And for me, it's like nothing and it takes me half an hour and it's very helpful for the other person. It's really tough to ask for money for that. Actually, I find that hardest thing when you're somebody who likes to help other people to then also ask for money is really difficult. So that's one of the challenges. In terms of my network, though, LinkedIn, of course, is important, but it doesn't actually not that much work flows from it. It's you've got to be out there at networking functions. You've got to be having coffees with people, talking to people, listening for problems for which you're the solution.
Yeah,
And
right.
things kind of work out. I know this
Yeah,
is sort
yeah.
of, everybody wants the dream thing, but the reality of life like this is, unless you've got a couple of steady clients, and I'm fortunate, to be honest, to have one or two steady clients throughout the last couple of years that have kept me going. You're often it's not easy, it's not a steady way of making an
Mm,
income.
mm. I think it's a good call out because I think people think portfolio career amazing. That's the direction. But you're right. There's a level of volatility. There's a level of humility. There's an inconsistent income stream. And so if you're okay to ride that storm, it sounds like maybe it's okay. But um, if you think of it like a corporate job, then it's probably not going to be the right thing.
Certainly not, and you need a lot like a float to keep going through the lean times.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit and have you talk about Melbourne
Mm.
Angels and the exposure you've got to startups. So I'm thinking if anyone is out there thinking about what's the first piece of advice that you would offer?
Okay, so if you're thinking about being an investor, you can invest with relatively small amounts of money. And I won't make this all about being an angel investor, but you know, you can make if you've got a kind of one to $200,000 to put into something through an angel group, you can spread your sort of investments over 5, 6, 7 different startups and head down that route. I won't spend a lot of time talking about that. You can always reach out to me if you want to know how to become an angel investor. However, really talking to an audience here of saying, look, I want to get involved in startups. I'm not, I don't have millions of dollars in the bank. I didn't either, by the way, but I had enough. Firstly, as you can tell, I often provide my labour to startups in terms of equity. And if you leave a job in corporate life, you'll be able to probably get one working for equity in a startup. But should you? Can you afford to? Or even for low pay? The thing is, you've got to think of your own time as money. You're investing something into that startup. So you've got to look at that startup like you're an investor. You've got to say, is the founder any good? Is there a product market fit? What stage are they at? If I'm paid equity, what's the valuation you're paid at? And certainly, what if how am I ever going to get money out of this? And it's usually on the basis of an exit of some type. So when you look at a startup and engagement, don't just get excited. It's classic for me. You'll often get excited in the beginning. You'll see, man, that startup's fantastic. And then you go through a big learning journey with them, and then you know a lot more about the industry and how hard it is. And it's a great journey, but you've got to have almost an investor mindset when you're thinking about going in. The second thing I'd say would be, I've seen some really successful startups where you've got a young founder and then an older kind of experienced corporate person being with them. So usually, you can imagine a startup might have a technical person, a marketing person, and a CEO, say, hypothetically. And I've certainly seen some really successful startups where you've got quite a young-ish kind of founder, in their mid to late 20s, but then supported by someone in the background that is really an experienced financial / marketing person or financial / operations person who understands corporate structures, who more familiar with capital raising. And that's a great team. So as long as, so that's an opportunity there. That's the second thing. The other thing about startups is there are a lot of people like me, I guess, who offer services to startups. And guess what? Startups don't have a lot of money. So if you're ever in the business of selling products, it's terrible to sell products to people who don't have a lot of money. And so I know many people that have started businesses offering specific advice to startups, and they don't have a lot of money, and therefore it's a really tough business. So don't imagine you can say, right, I'm going to be building an accelerator, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to support these, or I'm going to offer these marketing services for startups. They don't have a lot of money. So you got to do it more for love than money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good call. And the startups that you've seen outside of the team, what sort of themes have you seen that have been successful, or what sort of qualities would you look for, both in team and the types of sort of setup in terms of their organizations?
Okay. I think, I famously didn't invest in a startup, Kim Teo's startup, which was the scanning QR code one, when she came to Melbourne Angels, amongst others, when she was looking to launch. I mean, they're called Men and You now, but they were, I forgot their name.
Mr. Yums?
Mr. Yum, thank you. So one thing she had a great team. Okay, and she is great, Kim. But the couple of things that were overridingly impressive was the single-minded focus on the customer and fixing a customer problem. She and her team were in a cafe around the corner, because cafes were and bars and things with their customer, and they just spend time in the cafe and observe and watch and try. And then, of course, when COVID happened, they were in a great position to pivot, because they had a really close understanding of customer and also a need to fix that customer problem. So that customer focus is critical. So that's one thing. Having the classic problem, the second thing I'd like to say is the classic problem you have with startups is you get a brilliant founder who comes up with a really clever idea, technical idea, that's going to change the world, they think. And they put it out there, and then people aren't that interested. The really great founders focus on a customer problem for which they are the solution. And it's also something they can protect a little bit. In essence, some sort of land grab. Now, you could say, like, if we look at Kim's example with Mr. Yum, I'd seen 10 QR code scanning things in the last 5 years before her, so it was nothing new. Hers was a land grab. Hers was, we're going to be great and we're going to have a lot of money and get out there fast and grab the land. So there was no technical moat around that. But it's great to have a product that you can build a moat around, that you have some protection over, that people can't instantly replicate. And that's quite difficult. Yeah.
So is that why you rejected, because you'd seen so much competition in that time, and to go for a land grab? I mean, you need a lot of capital to focus on that land grab. Was that the thing?
Actually, it's a bit of a funny story. The reason I said no, I mean, I liked Kim. Melbourne Angels sort of said no as a group, but I could have still invested directly. But there was a couple of things that the overriding thing that was that my wife, when you're not one person alone, but my wife said, I'm never going to order something on my phone with a QR code. So she vetoed the decision. And that was, I know that's a course of comedy now between me and my wife, because, obviously Kim's done very well and I would have been in early. And so unfortunately, yeah.
I love the honesty. Thank you for sharing. And it's so funny because investing is a lot of heart, it sounds like. Obviously there's science, plenty of data behind it, and the broader opportunity, but there is a lot of heart behind the investment part too. So I mean, that brings me to my next question, which would be about raising funds. And if you are a startup, to your point, great founder, great team, great idea, like, what next? How does someone think about raising funds if all of those things feel like a tick?
Okay. A lot will depend on your stage. If you've got a minimum viable product, no revenue, but a minimum viable product and strong evidence of customer demand, that is perfection really for the angel group. If you've just got an idea, it's really hard to get funding. I think often the biggest challenge for early stage founders is to get to that point where they have a product. And if they're just starting out, they need to eat and live. And there's often that fools, families, and friends stage. Getting to that first hurdle is critical. And to be honest, it's almost impossible to raise funds before you've got a product. Once you've got a product, no revenue, that, believe it or not, is sort of okay. But again, your capital, even at that stage, is going to be quite expensive. Now, what I mean is by capital being expensive. So your valuation really is a measure of when you take investment. If an investor is investing and your valuation is low, then they get an excellent return on the basis of an exit. So, for instance, in the case of Melbourne Angels, we love to invest where valuations are 2.5 to 3 million, because the average exit in Australia is 20 to 30 million. So, because we look for 10x outcomes on our investment. Why so high? Because there's so many failures and so risky. Valuation for a founder is directly connected to risk. So if, for instance, you haven't got a product, you've got to build something, your risk is massive, and therefore your valuation's got to be low. Therefore, you've got to give away heaps of equity really to raise capital to do anything. Once you've got an MVP, the minimum viable product, there's reduced risk, and you can easily determine if customers want your product or what you need to pivot so they do. And of course, once you've got revenue, then you can start to talk to the bigger guys. But really, the bigger guys, the VCs, are not that interested until you've got maybe $1 million a year coming in revenue. That's a big ask for many startups. So in that zone, really, for me, anything up to 400K is almost pre-revenue sometimes. But that's so you've got that initial hump. Oh, I've got to build the thing. How do I get the money? Okay, I've got the thing. I need to launch it. Okay, I'll get help from angels. Okay, now can I reach that next revenue target to raise, a couple of $1 million from VCs, as opposed to, by the way, angels tend to put in kind of 250 to 500K, sometimes $1 million if a bunch of us get together, but it's sort of more in that zone. So you just got to think of those stages. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that helps a lot. Thank you. And I guess with your breadth of experience now, how can you support people?
Oh man, the problem for me is that I can help in so many ways, but what happens is you end up helping lots of people and get spread really thin. I guess I can help in every stage of what a startup is now, because I've had 6 years practice doing it, and I've had failures. I've worked with founders who've fallen over, and I've also had an exit. So I'm pretty much across all of those aspects of the startup journey. It's, for better or worse. So an example is, if you're raising capital and you need to manage a cap table, what should you use to do that? And for instance, I manage a cap table for one of my startup companies. I use Cake, by the way, and that works really well. There's a bunch of different things. Governance is one example. I guess the role of things like ESOPs. If you want to pay employees, that's often a big one. Things like um, things like ESIC. Are you ESIC compliant, which is a tax discount for investors if you're under a certain, if you haven't been around long and you haven't sort of had taken much investment or much expenditure yet, then you're ESIC compliant. It means your investors can get a 20% discount straight away off their investment through tax if they make their investment, and they get a capital gains free exit at the end. So yeah, there's lots of little things. Sort of a bit. Look, I know a lot about a little, a little about a lot rather, and so I can help in lots of different ways.
Well, thank you for sharing your experiences and honesty around a portfolio career as well. I think people tend to sugarcoat it, that it's that sort of next transition phase. But you're right, there is so many highs and lows. But I appreciate your vulnerability. Thank you for sharing.
No, my pleasure, and thanks for the chance to speak to you about it today.
Thanks, Paul.